Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution by teaching you about mental health, emotional intelligence, and handing over life lessons that you may not have learned up until now. These are the conversations to empower you. The things you say to yourself can have a major impact on how you view yourself, your life, and your actions. Negativity from another person is bad enough, but when it comes to your own head, that's tough. Self-talk is what you say to yourself. It's those inner conversations, the monologue that runs through your mind and generally right out of your mouth when you're talking to someone you trust. So whether you realize it or not, you may be causing your own heartache and pain by the conversations that you're having internally. So today, you and I are taking a one-on-one deep dive into why it matters how you speak to yourself, the toxic impact of negative self-talk, and then I'll show you how to change those thought patterns from negatives to neutrals and then positives once and for all. So let's get right to it. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. All right, my dear, it's probably time to buckle up. We're talking negative self-talk today, and it's an important conversation. It's an important one because, we all experience times where we talk negatively to ourselves. But this is the big but, right? We're starting right off with this. If we are constantly criticizing ourselves, or the conversation that is running through our head becomes this thing that is filled with judgment and negativity and punishing comments and downgrading comments, and they're just mean and hopeless and defeating comments, we begin to have this train of excess negativity that runs over us, right? We begin to ruminate. Everything in our life feels and is really terrible because that's where our mindset is. And I want to make sure that you understand that this negative self-talk impacts your body, your mind, your life, and by God, your loved ones. Okay? It does. And it's so important to understand how much this impacts your life in ways that you probably haven't even been thinking about. So let's talk about what negative self-talk is first so that we have an understanding. It is essentially the negative inner dialogue that reinforces your negative beliefs, your attitude, your fears. It's a thought train that diminishes your ability to have positive changes in your life. It's a killer of confidence, and it impacts so much. Like I just said, it impacts your thoughts, your feelings, your reactions. It can affect your motivation and your performance. It can really cause you to lean into polarizing experiences, perfectionism. It can magnify your limiting beliefs, and it loves the word should. It's how we speak to ourselves, and it's the stories that we tell ourselves. And this is so important. What's even greater to understand is there are levels of negative self-talk. It doesn't have to be this catastrophic conversation. It can be what I like to call simple negatives. Things that stick, that have a negative undertone. Things like, I've never done it before. A positive thought to that is, there's an opportunity to do something new. A negative, it's just too complicated. Positive, I'm going to think about this from a different angle. Negative, I'm too lazy to get this done. Positive, it really isn't a top priority for me right now. No one bothers to communicate with me. That's a negative. I see that I need to open some communication channels. I'm not getting any better at this. I need to give it another try. These are simple negatives that have great impact over time. We can divide these into different forms even. There are 5 different aspects that I want us to think about. And the first one is grounded. I'm not good at this, so I'm not going to try. That's a negative, right? But it's grounded negatives because we've already put something in place, giving ourselves evidence that we shouldn't attempt something. There's mean negative self-talk. You're never going to get this right. It's that degraded self-talk that many of us actually lean into. Then the third level is hopeless. I don't deserve this. I'm never going to be happy. I don't deserve to be happy. There's apathetic. I'll fail anyways, so what's the point? Or I've already failed, so I'm not going to try. It's that space where it doesn't matter how I show up because it's not going to work in my favor. And then that goes to the next level of defeated self-talk or negative self-talk. And this looks really, really hard. And so it's best that I don't try, period. Or even if I did try, I'm not going to be able to do it. This musing of the inner critic becomes so defining. It's the inner dialogue, like I just said, that becomes the limit to your belief, to your abilities, and even your potential. It even diminishes the future ability to lean into a positive. And it really can create such a long-lasting experience. There are so many impacts to negative self-talk that are extremely damaging long-term if the excess rumination, the excess mental load of negativity continues for quite some time. So we see depression. We see generalized anxiety disorder. We even have an increase of PTSD, psychosis, OCD, social anxiety disorder. Those are just some of the few. Even feelings of hopelessness. It's really difficult. We see increased stress. The impact is so intense. Anxiety and depression are high-level impacts of this negative self-talk, but there are lower levels that also have consequences like limited thinking. The more you tell yourself something you can't do, of course you can't do it, right? Perfectionism, that you have to be perfect in order to do the thing anyway, and you have a hard time getting started because you know it's not going to be perfect. Feelings of depression can come about. This is a little different than the exacerbating experience of depression, where it just feels kind of unchecked, unbalanced, and we feel sad. So we experience depression, but we don't necessarily have the physical aspects of depression. And of course, we can have challenging relationships because if we're constantly criticizing ourselves, we tend to create insecurity, or we turn the negative self-talk into experiences in the relationships, and we become needy, we become overwhelming. There are usually some lack of communication problems, and we also have a way of turning the negativity on our partner or on the person that we're having a relationship with, no matter what kind of relationship it is. And so that can cause a breakup in the friendship, a breakup in the relationship. It can really become a problem. So let's talk about how to minimize this negative self-talk, how to pretty much eradicate it altogether. Now, I want you to know this is a practice, okay? This is a practice. This is not going to come easy. If you have spent a long time using your inner voice against yourself, it's going to take a hot minute to change directions, okay? Here's the most important part. The only person that is truly 100% impacted by your negative self-talk is you. And what is so important to understand is that you are always listening. What do I mean by that? I mean, your brain is always listening to everything that you say, and it is using it as the instruction manual as to how to show up, how to read the moment, how to engage the emotion. It is really listening and following command. Do you understand? So if you think about negative thoughts all the time, what happens is there's a small place at the base of your brainstem. A lot of times you'll hear this called as the reptilian brain. There are many technical names here, but we're not going to use them today. I like to call it the bouncer. It's the brain's bouncer. And it allows information in based on the instructions that you are feeding it. So it's always looking for things. The bouncer at the nightclub, remember when you were younger? You went out, you showed them your ID, they let you in or they didn't let you in. And they were looking for certain aspects as to determine their decision. This is what this piece of your brain does, okay? If you are telling it, I am absolutely going to lean into negatives all the time, it's only really going to let the negatives in because that's what you've trained it to do. So we have to turn it around. It's going to take a hot minute, but that's okay. The first thing that I want us to do in order to minimize this self-talk is to, again, lean into the fact that we all have an inner critic. And it might be time for you to name it. Give it a nickname. Whatever you decide, as far as a name, stick to it. Make sure that you have some kind of negative connotation to that inner critic's name, because what we want to do is make it a standout situation. You know that friend of yours that you kind of keep your distance because she's just negative, and so you don't tell her a lot of things, you don't really engage with her a lot? Yep, same thing. That's what we're trying to do here, is create an experience around that inner critic so that you stay away. When you think of your inner critic as a force outside of yourself, you give it a name, it becomes easier to realize that you do not have to agree with this thing, this person, this entity that is controlling so much of your mindset. And it also becomes less threatening because it seems more ridiculous to be criticized by something that isn't necessarily real, that doesn't necessarily have a leg to stand on as it speaks. So I think, Saturday Night Live, if you have seen that show, used to have Debbie Downer. It's sort of that same thing. Of course, we know that the name Karen has gotten a really bad rap for being overreactive. Who is your inner critic? What is her name? Or what is his name? Now from here, let's talk about negative to neutral to positive, and then we'll go through the steps of how to minimize that negative self-talk that I promised you. Now, here's the thing. Your brain has a negativity bias, which means it's going to be looking for anything that could potentially cause it to not feel safe. Right? So we're looking for the negatives. We're looking for the burning building or the person running across the street. We're looking both ways. We don't get into the situations that could be harmful for us because we're looking for them. And because we have that negativity bias, we also have sort of this default in our brain that's not going to allow us to go from really negative thoughts or negative thinking to super positive, in control, grounded thought. We're not going to jump from one spectrum to the other. We are not going to move up and down the ruler of thought as quickly as that. And nor do we want to, because that's very confusing. That's very off balance. So if we have a lot of negative thoughts, instead of trying to just make them positive, because let's be honest, that's very impossible most of the time. We're not going to have this super low thought and try to elevate it and make it perfect and stick. It doesn't work that way. Right? So what we want to do is sort of move it out of the low-lying emotions, the negativity, and get it into a neutral space. This is really important. We don't want to try to go for positive. We want to go for neutral. I can't do this. Remember, that's a negative. The neutral of that is, I've not done this. The positive of the thought is, I can do this. So negative, I can't. The neutral, I haven't. The positive, I can. Do you see the difference there? And even just moving from the negative to the neutral actually helps so much. It shifts that negativity away. It gets us into a more grounded, healthier space. And then we have the opportunity to build some evidence, to go through some of these steps to get to the positive. If we go from negative to neutral to positive, that positive is going to feel better and actually stick around longer than trying to make the leap from one end to the other. So give yourself that space. Every negative thought that comes in, answer it with a neutral. I can't, I haven't. That's a yet, right? That's a I haven't done it yet. It leaves the door open for more. The negative, I don't like myself. The neutral, there's been things that I have experienced that have been hard that have told me not to like myself. Positive, I love myself. What is the answer to the negative thought, the negative train that's happening that is a neutral? One of the steps that we're going to talk about is to contain the negativity. And when we contain it, we're trying to take it to the neutral space. So let's get into those steps now that you understand that we are not jumping from one extreme to the other. And when we talk about these steps, remember, you may be in a different place in your mindset and you may not need all of them. That's something you guys send me quite often. I did this, but I didn't really need that step. And so then I got lost or I got bored, didn't do the thing. Use what works for you, right? You don't have to use everything here. Not everything is going to apply. This is a generalized experience for everyone. Not everything is going to fit what works for you. Let's get into the steps. First things first, you can't change what you don't witness. How many times have you heard me say that? Right? You have to recognize your negative thoughts. You have to be able to get out of the automatic thinking, the things that just pop into your head with no conscious effort or conscious awareness to them, and get into a space where you are evaluating your thoughts. You've heard me say this before. I will say it again. You must write down your thoughts in order to get an understanding of how many times you're thinking this way. Many people don't want to do this because it is scary as hell to see a laundry list of the same negatives pop up over and over again. And I get that. But in order to change something, you have to witness it. So get your pen and paper out, carry it around for a couple days, give it a week if you're really going to put some effort into this, and write down when the negative thoughts hit you. If you're unwilling to do that, I'm going to give you a side step to it. I don't, really want to. I'm not very excited about it. But if you are unwilling to write down your thoughts, I want you to become very conscious and aware of your thoughts, which means slowing down. Really think about what's happening in your thinking. Once you recognize that your thoughts are unproductive, irrational, unrealistic, causing you problems, making you feel a certain way, we really key into those thoughts. And from there, we're going to look for the evidence that your thought is true. You may have heard me talk about the fact that your brain has no filter for positive or negative. It doesn't know. It just only knows what you tell it. So a thought comes in and it means nothing, right? You've heard me talk about, I'm starving, and there's no connection to whether that's true or false. If you are starving, you're going to validate that, right? And same thing with a negative thought. I hate myself. If you deeply believe that on all levels, you're going to have an emotional rise that's negative, that connects to it, and it agrees with it. I agree. Yep, I do hate myself. Your emotions really become impacted and become more involved. And the next step is more action, which could just be another thought, right? And it's from here that we begin to have that emotional storm that takes us over. The negativity spiral begins. And it's really difficult to get out of it once it gets going, right? We've all been there. So look for the evidence of, is this true? In most situations, in most thoughts, they're most likely opinions instead of facts. So you can ask yourself, what evidence do I have that this is true? Stick to true facts, not the email from someone or the text messages that somebody said something, or the bullshit that your mom said one time, or the thing that the friend of a friend said to you that you're now using as evidence. Stick to truth, to fact. If you need to, on that piece of paper, create a list of evidence that supports the thoughts. What is the grounded reason for the thought? If you cannot find evidence and it's more of an opinion, understand that you don't actually have to connect to it, okay? And that means that we're also looking for evidence that the thought is not true. So this is really step 3. The first one is to recognize it. The second is to look for the evidence of its truth. And the third is to create a list of why it may not be true, why it's an opinion, why it is not something that is fact. And if you struggle to find evidence, you need to realize that you're having an emotional reaction to a thought, not a true experience of fact. Very, very important. From there, you can offer yourself an opposite thought, meaning a neutral thought. Again, we're not trying to jump to the positive. What is the neutral thought? I don't want you to try to convince yourself to be overly positive. It won't work, right? But you can look at the reality of the situation. Let me walk you through that before we get to the next step. And let's take the thought process of, I'm so unlucky. This is a low-level negative thought, right? It's not a super high negative thought, but it's still one that can tank your mindset. So I'm so unlucky, negative thought. To move it into a neutral, first we are witnessing it. I see it, I hear it, I feel it. I am unlucky. Things are not working out for me. Next thing we're doing is we're looking for evidence of it being true. Now, if you're in a negative headspace, you're going to be able to find negative evidence real easy, right? My car broke down. I busted a tire. My spouse is mad at me for this or that. My kids were super upset today. There's your negative experience, your evidence to support your negative thinking, okay? But these are all outside factors that are mainly based in opinion. They're not true. Now, of course, the car breaking down, that is the truth. That's tangible evidence. But the rest of it's all based on opinion or an experience, and you're picking up how you think that person is relating to the moment. So if you don't have true grounded evidence in it, it's not true evidence. But the car, okay, so we have one factor that says, yes, you are right. This thought is correct. Now we're going to look for evidence of it not being true. That could even look like, that light, the check engine light's been on for quite some time and you didn't do anything about it. You've been running this vehicle without taking care of it properly. And so is it that you're really unlucky, or is it that you're not paying attention to what needs to be handled? Is it really luck? Or is it the fact that you're not stepping up and owning your experiences? If you can't conjure up true evidence, it's probably not true. This is a factor that I call containing the negativity. It's when you find yourself engaging in that, you basically contain the damage, that inner critical voice, whatever you've named it, into this one experience, into this one thing, instead of casting this wide net of negativity into everything. So if we're putting it and containing it in one box, it actually feels a lot better than having it spread across everything. And it's here where we move into the next step, where we change the negativity to the neutral. Once we caught it, once we've engaged, we've looked for the evidence, we begin to challenge it, and we become more gentle with our language to where the negativity is muted. Neutrality okay? Meaning not positive, not negative, neutral. It doesn't sound like I don't like. It doesn't sound like I don't prefer or I hate or this is challenging or I can't. Instead, everything is framed like you could put the word yet at the end of it. This is the open door. Neutrality is an open door. Once we get there, once we get to the neutrality, when we're not in the vast line of negative thinking where the negativity is really influencing us, it's here that we can begin to try to push it into the positive. Here, we think like a friend, okay? When our inner critic is at its worst, when she is biting and she's your worst enemy, whatever her name is, she's going to say some things that hurt, right? She's not treating you like a friend. In fact, the other day, I was sitting with a close friend of mine, and she was really in a bad space. And it's a rarity for her. She's usually very positive. She's very clear about what she wants. She is very clear about her mindset, and it's something that she holds quite dear. And she was just not in a healthy mindset that day, as, again, sometimes we're not. And a lot of things were coming out of her mouth, a lot of negatives. And I just said, could you please treat yourself like a friend? She stopped and just kind of looked at me and she was like, I thought I was. I'm like, no, you're not. You're trashing your greatness. You're trashing your worth. Your negativity is spiraling. Would you mind cutting it out? And again, the same kind of cross look came across her face. And she said, you know what? You're right. I've been doing that for a couple of weeks now. I said, stop talking about my friend that way. And that's exactly the truth. When you think of yourself like a friend, you're not going to beat yourself up like that. So think of your inner critic as the person that we don't need in the friend group, and think of yourself as the person that we want to treasure and protect. Talk to yourself like you are protected, okay? And it's here then that we go to the next step and we shift the perspective. Sometimes looking at things long-term can help you realize that you're placing way too much emphasis on something small. So what's another perspective that you can look at when it comes to the thought? I hate the way that I look. Are you sure you hate it long-term? Are you sure that as you age, it won't change? Or as you maybe change some lifestyle choices, that won't change? Or you're just having a bad day? Or maybe something's going on medically? There's a million different perspective shifts. If you think about how you can minimize the negativity, the urgency to answer the negative talk, you can shift your perspective into allowing, right? Allowing. Stop the thought in its tracks. It doesn't necessarily need more power to grow if it's only going to take you down. The next thing that you can do is to say it out loud. Sometimes when you catch yourself in negative thinking, it's hard to get it into a neutral. So instead of trying and forcing and trying to push your way to make this negative a neutral, say it out loud. Now, cover the kids' ears. One of my friends will say that shit out loud. Say it out loud. Seriously, say that shit out loud and see if you would actually say it. If you were standing in front of a group of people, would you say it? And I love when she says that. Because truthfully, would you? Would you seriously stand in front of a huge group of people and go, I am so fat. I hate my thighs. I hate myself. I hate the way that I look. You wouldn't. You so wouldn't. You wouldn't draw that kind of attention to yourself, especially if your mindset is negative, because you are opening the door for criticism and all of the things. So say it out loud. Hear the ridiculousness of the negative self-talk. Once you do that, it begins to change the rhythm of what you're saying, because you're just not going to say that stuff out loud. And once you do it enough times, you are going to be uncomfortable with the thought being in your head, let alone out in the world. Now, when I say it out loud, I want you to realize that I'm saying say it to yourself, because you may actually say that to a best friend or somebody close to you and not even think about it. but I want you to say this out loud to yourself, say in the mirror, whatever, so that it's you talking to you with your full attention. Okay. Next, I want you to put a full stop on the thought. For some people who have a really negative train of thought, I will ask them to witness the thought and then visualize a stop sign in their mind. When they redirect the thought in this manner, their mind will actually go to whatever the visualization is. So they're really putting a full stop to the thought. And it's here that we can replace it with a neutral thought. It's very important to stop this. If you can actually get into a space where you are changing the rhythm of the conversation within yourself, you can actually begin to practice and remove the self-degrading talk. You might not ever get rid of the negative self-talk completely, right? I told you that it's totally fine. We all absolutely have it. But the goal is to be able to recognize when your thoughts are not healthy, when your brain is predicting and drawing negative conclusions that are impacting you. If your thoughts are stirring up uncomfortable emotions and unproductive behavior, you have to be well equipped to change the rhythm. You do not want to spend the rest of your life beating yourself up because of the inner conversation. This is a practiced skill set. It's not easy. I'm going to say it again. Don't get frustrated. We even have evidence that it takes 400 repetitions of something to make it stick. So you're going to have to practice. Once you get good at this, there's something more that you can do, which is one, reassure yourself. Your self-talk can help you get into a more productive place, right? So reassure yourself. This is just a negative thought. Actually, I am beautiful. I do love my body. I am just fine. I don't know how to do that yet, but I'm working on it, whatever the reassurance is. And then relabel your talk. When negative words come in, you don't have to relate to them. You can relabel them. When you get into this state, when you have gotten the negative to neutral pathway handled, you can start moving yourself into positive thinking. Positive thinking does not mean you're sticking your head in the sand and that negativities are never going to approach you. That is a line of BS that I do not want you to subscribe to. Positive self-talk is different than that. It means that we are filtering the negatives. We are not taking the personal stance to the negatives. We're removing all of the worst case scenarios out of them, and we're not being polarized by good or bad. We're actually getting into a space that we can witness what's happening and feel good about what's happening. When we focus on positive thinking, we are able to identify areas to make changes in, right? There's more optimism. There's more ways to shift into positives. We have a different daily experience, and we actually change things that could end up being major downers into positives. So when we focus this way, we check ourselves, basically. We're open to everything, closed to nothing. We follow the healthy lifestyle. Our mindset is really healthy. We're very keyed in to who we're around, and we practice telling ourselves every single day that worst case scenario doesn't always have to be the rhythm to everything. So because I gave you the benefits, of course, being awful, to the negative thought pattern, let me give you the health benefits to the positive. One, we don't see a lot of anxiety when we have a clean and positive mindset. We actually see increased lifespan. Rates of depression are much lower. Rates of distress are much lower. We have a greater resistance to these bad viruses that go around. We have better physical well-being. We see lower instances of heart attack, reduced risk of stress because of heart disease. We have better coping skills during hard times, less stress. You get it? It's better to think positively. Okay. But I don't want you to think positively just for the sake of positive thinking. I want you to have purpose behind it. I want you to know that you will slip up. You're going to mess this up, right? I always say that, but it's true. You're going to mess it up, and it's okay to mess it up. What you want to do is to have an understanding that you can change the way that you speak to yourself, and that the way you speak to yourself 100% matters. It's important to know that your self-talk can either kill your self-confidence or it can boost it. It can either make you feel great or it can take you down. Your self-talk has so much power. You are the only one listening, and this is the instruction manual to your life from your brain. That's a pretty important statement, isn't it? How I talk to myself is the instruction manual to my life. Changes things. Once you begin to change the rhythm of your inner conversation, so much changes. Tap into different thoughts. Practice it. Negatives to neutrals, neutrals to positives. If you are going to read the instruction of your life out loud, what does it sound like? And what are you building? Don't you think it's time to find out? Once you do, it becomes an essential step into getting your life together. Thank you so much for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you're seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, Pinterest, Insight Timer, and now Threads. I invite you to visit my website, the show notes, my blog, and my merch store at getyourlifetogethergirl.com. I also invite you to review this podcast as it helps us put our show in front of others who may be needing this kind of grounded information. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss next week's valuable conversation. I can't thank you enough for being a valuable member of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.